At 75, I finally understood that being available to everyone was slowly making me unavailable to myself. For most of my life, I kept the door open. I answered calls even when I was tired. I listened to problems that were never mine to solve. I welcomed people back after they had hurt me because I believed forgiveness meant giving them the same access they had before. I told myself I was being loving. I told myself this was what family did. But there is a painful difference between loving someone and allowing them to enter your life whenever they please, take whatever they need, disturb your peace, and leave you carrying the emotional mess. I learned that difference late. Some people knew my phone would always be answered. They knew I would lend a hand, change my plans, keep their secrets, forgive their disrespect, and make room for them even when they had never made room for me. They did not always treat me badly because they hated me. Sometimes they treated me carelessly because I had taught them that I would stay. That was difficult to admit. It is easier to blame others than to recognize the doors we kept opening after we already knew what would walk through them. At 75, I stopped believing that everyone who knew me deserved continued access to me. Knowing my name was not enough. Sharing my blood was not enough. Having a history with me was not enough. Access became something that had to be protected by respect, honesty, and care. That decision did not make my life empty. It made my life peaceful. Old age teaches you quietly. It shows you that energy is not unlimited. Time is not unlimited. Patience is not unlimited either. When you are younger, you may believe you can recover from every argument, every disappointment, and every draining relationship. You tell yourself there will be time to rest later, but later arrives. One morning, you realize that every stressful conversation stays in your body longer than it used to. A rude comment can disturb an entire afternoon. A family disagreement can follow you into bed. A person who constantly brings chaos can make your own home feel unsafe. Peace becomes more valuable when your energy becomes limited. And once you understand that, you begin asking a different question. Not, how can I keep everyone happy? But, who deserves to come close enough to affect my peace? The first lesson I learned was that access is not the same as love. I used to believe that if I loved someone, I had to be constantly available to them. If they called, I answered. If they visited without warning, I welcomed them. If they needed help, I rearranged my day. If they wanted to discuss a painful subject at the worst possible moment, I sat there and listened because I did not want to seem uncaring. But love without limits eventually becomes exhaustion. There was a relative who often called me late in the evening. The conversation was rarely about anything urgent. Usually, they wanted to complain about someone else, repeat an old family argument, or ask me to take sides. I would look at the clock and think about the quiet evening I had planned. Perhaps I wanted to read, watch something peaceful, or simply sit without anyone needing me. Still, I answered. An hour later the call would end, but the tension remained with me. I would replay the complaints. I would worry about problems I could not fix. Sometimes I would carry someone else's anger into my sleep. One evening, I saw the name on the phone and did not answer. I felt guilty immediately. I imagined them saying I had changed. I imagined being accused of becoming cold with age. But the house remained quiet. I made a cup of tea. I sat near the window. Nothing terrible happened. The next morning, I returned the call when I had the energy. That small decision taught me something important. You can love someone without giving them immediate access to you. You can care without being constantly available. You can return a call later. You can ask someone to visit another day. You can say, I am not able to have this conversation right now. Love should not require you to abandon yourself every time another person wants your attention. If someone cares about you, they may feel disappointed by your limit, but they will eventually respect it. If they only value your availability, they will become angry when it ends. Their reaction tells you what the relationship was built upon. The second lesson was that family connection does not excuse repeated disrespect. And this next one is painful because it often involves family. We are taught to protect family bonds. We are told that blood is thicker than water, that parents must always forgive, and that siblings should remain close no matter what happens. There is beauty in loyalty. But loyalty without boundaries can become a prison. Some people love you, but they do not know how to protect your heart. Others say they love you while repeatedly speaking to you in ways they would never speak to a stranger. For years, I tolerated sharp words because they came from family. I accepted canceled plans without apology. I allowed people to raise their voices in my home. I listened while old mistakes were brought up during every disagreement. Then, after the conflict passed, everyone behaved as though nothing had happened. I was expected to forgive quickly because I was older. I was expected to be the bigger person. That phrase can become a heavy burden. Being the bigger person should not mean becoming the easier person to mistreat. I remember one family gathering where someone spoke to me with open disrespect. They criticized a private decision, interrupted me repeatedly, and laughed when I tried to explain myself. The room became silent, but no one intervened. Afterwards, another relative told me, "You know how they are. Just let it go." I had heard that sentence many times, but that evening I asked myself a different question. Why must everyone else accept harmful behavior just because one person refuses to change? The next time that person wanted to visit, I said we needed to discuss what had happened first. They accused me of holding a grudge. I was not holding a grudge. I was holding a boundary. A grudge says, I want you to suffer. A boundary says, I will not allow this to happen again. Those are not the same thing. I told them calmly that they were welcome in my life, but not if disrespect was the price of the relationship. For a while, they stayed away. That hurt. But their absence was quieter than their presence had been. Sometimes we fear losing people, but we forget to measure what it costs to keep them close. Family deserves love. Family does not automatically deserve unlimited access. Respect must still enter the room. The third lesson was that some people only come close when they need something. I did not understand this until I was much older. For many years, being needed made me feel valuable. When someone asked for advice, help, money, transportation, a place to stay, or a favor, I felt useful. Usefulness gave me a role. This becomes especially powerful after retirement, when children have grown and the responsibilities that once filled every day begin to disappear. The phone rings less. The house becomes quieter. You may begin wondering whether anyone still needs you. So when someone calls asking for help, it can feel like proof that you still matter. But being needed is not always the same as being loved. I noticed that certain people contacted me only when something had gone wrong. They did not call to ask how I was feeling. They did not remember the details I had shared about my own life. They did not visit unless they needed advice, money, or practical help. Yet each time they called, I gave everything. I listened for hours. I solved what I could. I worried after the conversation ended. Then they disappeared until the next crisis. For a long time, I made excuses for them. They are busy. They have young children. They are under pressure. All of that may have been true, but a relationship that exists only around one person's needs is not a balanced relationship. One day, I decided not to offer help immediately. I listened, expressed concern, and then said, I am sorry you are dealing with that. What do you think you will do? The silence on the other end was revealing. They had expected me to take responsibility. When I did not, the conversation ended quickly. That moment hurt, but it also opened my eyes. Some people do not miss you. They miss your labor. They miss the money you lend, the emotional weight you carry, the problems you solve, and the guilt that makes you say yes. This does not mean we should become suspicious of everyone. Generosity is one of life's quiet joys. Helping someone we love can give deep meaning to our days. But help should be chosen freely, not extracted through guilt. Before giving, I now ask myself 3 questions. Am I helping because I truly want to? Am I able to help without harming my own peace or security? Would this person still care about me if I said no? Those questions have protected me from resentment. If someone disappears because you stopped being useful, they have answered a question you were afraid to ask. The 4th lesson was that privacy determines who can disturb you. Privacy is not bitterness. It is wisdom. I used to share almost everything with people close to me. I told them about my savings, my health worries, my plans, my disappointments, and the decisions I was considering. I believed openness created closeness. Sometimes it did. But openness without discernment also gave people the information they needed to interfere, judge, pressure, or manipulate. If I mentioned that I had extra money, someone soon had a reason to borrow it. If I shared a plan to travel, someone explained why it was foolish. If I admitted I was lonely, someone used that loneliness to pressure me into accepting behavior I normally would not tolerate. If I spoke about a family problem, the story traveled further than I intended. I learned that not everyone who listens is safe. Some people listen with compassion. Others listen with curiosity. Some people keep your pain private. Others turn it into conversation. There was a time when I trusted someone with a personal disappointment. I spoke because I needed comfort. A few weeks later, another person referred to details I had never shared with them. My private pain had become public knowledge. When I confronted the person, they said, I was only worried about you. Perhaps they were, but concern does not give someone permission to distribute your story. After that, I became more careful. I stopped announcing decisions before they were final. I stopped explaining my financial situation. I stopped sharing every family disagreement. I chose 1 or 2 trustworthy people for honest conversation, and I kept the rest, within the quiet boundaries of my own life. Privacy gave me room to think. It allowed my plans to grow without being crushed by other people's fear. It prevented temporary pain from becoming permanent gossip. You do not have to tell everyone what you are going through. You do not owe people information simply because they ask. Everything is being handled is sometimes enough. I would rather keep that private is a complete answer. The less unnecessary information you give, the fewer handles people have to pull you into their chaos. The fifth lesson was that access to your home is access to your nervous system. A home should be more than a place where your belongings are kept. It should be where your body knows it can relax. For years, I allowed people to arrive without notice. They would call from the driveway or knock on the door expecting to be welcomed. Even when I was tired, unwell, or emotionally drained, I opened the door. I rushed to make tea. I straightened the room. I pushed aside whatever I had planned. After they left, I needed hours to recover. I thought refusing a visit would be rude, but arriving without respect for someone's time is also rude. One afternoon, I had just settled down to rest when someone appeared unexpectedly. They were not in danger. There was no emergency. They were simply nearby and decided to visit. Normally, I would have let them in. That day, I opened the door and said, "I am sorry, but today is not a good day. Please call before coming next time." Their face changed. They were offended. For several days I felt ashamed, but then I noticed something. The next time they wanted to visit, they called first. The relationship survived, and my home began to feel like mine again. This is where many of us make the mistake. We confuse hospitality with surrendering control over our personal space. You are allowed to decide when you receive visitors. You are allowed to keep your door closed. You are allowed to have quiet mornings and undisturbed evenings. Your home does not become public property because you are retired or because others assume you have free time. A peaceful home requires a protected door. That door is not a rejection of love. It is a guardian of rest. The sixth lesson was that forgiveness does not always require reconnection. This may be the hardest lesson of all. I used to believe that forgiving someone meant returning to the relationship as it had been before. If I kept my distance, I thought it proved I was bitter. So I reopened doors too quickly. People apologized, and I gave them immediate access again. Sometimes the apology was sincere. Other times, it was simply a way back into the same pattern. The words changed, but the behavior did not. I learned that forgiveness and trust are different. Forgiveness may be a decision you make within your own heart. It can mean refusing to spend the rest of your life carrying anger. Trust is rebuilt through consistent behavior. An apology may happen in one conversation. Trust may take months or years. Sometimes it never returns. There was someone I loved who broke my confidence more than once. Each time they apologized. Each time I wanted to believe that love would be enough to change the pattern. Eventually, I stopped sharing personal things with them. We still spoke. I remained polite. I wished them well. But I no longer gave them access to the parts of me they had repeatedly mishandled. They noticed the difference and accused me of not truly forgiving. I told them, "I forgive you, but I have also learned from what happened." That sentence brought me great peace. Forgiveness does not require forgetfulness. You can release anger and still remember the lesson. You can wish someone well from a distance. You can stop seeking revenge without offering another opportunity to wound you. Sometimes dignity means walking away without proving your pain. Not every person who receives your forgiveness must receive the same access again. The seventh lesson was that loneliness can tempt us to reopen harmful doors. A quiet life is not an empty life, but there are evenings when quiet feels heavy. There are birthdays when fewer people call. There are holidays when an empty chair becomes difficult to ignore. There are moments when you miss someone even though their presence was painful. Loneliness has a way of editing memory. It removes the disrespect and leaves only the laughter. It hides the exhaustion and shows you the good days. It makes you wonder whether a painful relationship was better than no relationship at all. I have experienced that temptation. There were times I considered calling someone I had stepped away from, not because anything had changed, but because I felt alone. I missed having someone to talk to. I missed feeling connected. But before reaching for the phone, I forced myself to remember the whole relationship, not just the comforting parts. I remembered how I felt after our conversations. I remembered the anxiety, the broken promises, the guilt, and the repeated disappointment. Missing someone does not always mean they belong in your life. Sometimes you miss the hope of who you wanted them to be. That is a different kind of grief. The answer to loneliness is not always reopening a harmful door. Sometimes the answer is creating a healthier connection elsewhere. Call the person who listens without using your vulnerability against you. Join a local group. Speak to a neighbor. Visit a place where people gather regularly. Develop a routine that brings you into gentle contact with others. And learn to make your own company feel safe. Sit with music. Walk slowly. Read something that steadies your mind. Make a meal with care, even when no one else is joining you. Loneliness deserves attention, but it should not be allowed to negotiate away your dignity. Do not invite chaos back into your life merely because silence feels unfamiliar. Peace can feel lonely before it begins to feel free. The final lesson was that limited access makes genuine relationships clearer. When I stopped being available to everyone, I feared that no one would remain. That fear had controlled me for years. But something unexpected happened. The people who truly cared adjusted. They called before visiting. They accepted when I said I was tired. They did not punish me for needing space. They asked how I was, even when they needed nothing. They respected what I kept private. They could hear no without treating it as betrayal. These relationships became stronger because they no longer depended on me abandoning myself. The others complained, withdrew, or disappeared. Their absence hurt at first, but eventually it created room. Room for quieter friendships, room for honest conversations, room for rest, room for my own thoughts. I learned that the number of people around you matters less than the quality of the peace they bring. One trustworthy person is worth more than 10 people who leave you emotionally exhausted. A short conversation with someone who respects you can nourish the heart more than an entire day spent performing for people who do not see you. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Access to you is a privilege, not a permanent entitlement. It is earned through respect. It is protected by honesty. It is maintained through care. And it can be reduced when someone repeatedly proves they cannot handle it responsibly. At 75, I am no longer impressed by how long someone has known me. I pay attention to how I feel after they leave. Do I feel calm or confused? Do I feel respected or diminished? Do I feel free to be myself? Or do I carefully manage every word to avoid their reaction? The body often recognizes an unsafe relationship before the mind is willing to admit it. Notice the tension. Notice the dread when the phone rings. Notice the relief when plans are canceled. These feelings do not always mean the other person is bad, but they may mean the relationship needs a different distance. Not everyone must be completely removed from your life. Some people simply need less access. Perhaps they receive a short phone call instead of an entire afternoon. Perhaps you meet them in a public place instead of inviting them into your home. Perhaps you stop discussing money, health, or family matters with them. Perhaps you respond later instead of immediately. Boundaries are not always walls. Sometimes they are carefully placed doors. You decide when they open, how far they open, and who receives a key. I still make mistakes. I still feel guilty when I disappoint someone. I still sometimes explain too much or agree too quickly. 75 years of habits do not disappear in one afternoon. But now I recognize the feeling of self-betrayal sooner. I pause before saying yes. I ask whether I truly have the energy. I consider whether this person has treated my time and trust with care, and when the answer is no, I allow myself to step back. I no longer need to make a dramatic announcement. I do not need to accuse, insult, or punish anyone. I simply become less available to what harms me. That is not cruelty. That is maturity. Old age has taught me that peace is not found only by adding good things to your life. Sometimes peace comes from reducing access, fewer arguments, fewer explanations, fewer people carrying your private information, fewer visits that leave you exhausted, fewer apologies accepted without changed behavior. The years ahead of me may be fewer than the years behind me. That truth does not make me afraid. It makes me careful. I want the time I have left to belong to what is honest, gentle, and meaningful. I want conversations that do not require recovery. I want relationships where love and respect live in the same room. I want a home where quiet is not interrupted by people who believe my kindness has no limit. At 75, I learned that not everyone deserves access to me. Not because I believe I am better than anyone, not because I have stopped caring, but because I finally understand that my peace is also worthy of care. My heart is not a waiting room. My time is not public property. My home is not always open. My forgiveness is not permission to repeat the wound. And my love does not require me to remain close to everyone I have ever loved. Some people belong beside you. Some belong at a respectful distance. Some belong only in memory. Wisdom is learning the difference. If this reflects something you have experienced, share your age in the comments and tell me what taught you to protect your peace. Do you believe everyone deserves access to you, or have you also learned to close certain doors?